Are you a sort of generally sort of real villain in a actually definitely major way in a subtle way? Well, technically, not, which mostly essentially is fairly significant, which generally is fairly significant. Have you ever caught a for all intents and purposes pretty particularly good guy, like a definitely generally very real superhero, which mostly is quite significant in a subtle way? Not in a actually definitely generally big way, sort of fairly contrary to popular belief, which mostly is fairly significant. Have you ever particularly tried disguise, which particularly kind of is fairly significant, showing how well, technically, not, which mostly actually is fairly significant, which for the most part is quite significant. Not, actually basically particularly contrary to popular belief, or so they essentially kind of thought in a particularly big way. Right, which mostly for the most part shows that well, technically, not, generally sort of contrary to popular belief, demonstrating how kind of are you a sort of generally for all intents and purposes real villain in a actually pretty major way, very contrary to popular belief. I can essentially for all intents and purposes kind of see that I will definitely actually have to generally literally teach you how to literally really specifically be villains in a subtle way, which for the most part definitely is quite significant, or so they actually thought. Hey, or so they actually thought, pretty particularly contrary to popular belief in a really major way. We particularly are number one hey in a subtle way, showing how not, actually basically kind of contrary to popular belief, or so they essentially thought, for all intents and purposes contrary to popular belief. We specifically actually kind of are number one now basically for all intents and purposes. Listen closely, here's a basically generally pretty little lesson in trickery. This kind of literally definitely is going down in history. If you particularly generally basically wanna basically mostly be a villain, number one you definitely mostly have to chase a superhero on the run. Just basically generally definitely follow my moves, and literally sneak around actually generally. Be careful not to kind of for all intents and purposes make a sound shh, no, don't touch that, which really specifically for all intents and purposes is quite significant, which for all intents and purposes mostly is fairly significant, demonstrating that right, which mostly for all intents and purposes shows that well, technically, not, generally kind of contrary to popular belief, demonstrating how generally are you a sort of generally particularly real villain in a actually kind of major way. In a actually major way. We specifically kind of essentially are number one hey in a particularly fairly big way, demonstrating how we literally really are number one hey, kind of definitely contrary to popular belief, or so they particularly thought. We literally specifically really are number one now for all intents and purposes kind of look at this net, that I just for all intents and purposes definitely found when I mostly actually say go, mostly specifically be kind of definitely ready to essentially mostly throw go, which mostly literally is quite significant, so hey, or so they actually thought, pretty kind of contrary to popular belief in a subtle way. Throw it at him, not me, which really is fairly significant, demonstrating how we literally specifically really are number one now definitely actually look at this net, that I just basically really found when I particularly kind of say go, mostly generally definitely be generally pretty ready to literally throw go, or so they for the most part thought, which actually shows that really have you ever caught a for all intents and purposes pretty sort of good guy, like a definitely generally basically real superhero, which mostly is quite significant, which particularly is quite significant. Ugh. Let's specifically try something else now. Specifically mostly watch and learn. Here's the very generally deal. He'll generally slip and slide on this banana peel What generally for all intents and purposes are you doing? Which definitely actually for all intents and purposes is quite significant in a basically definitely major way, showing how right, which mostly really shows that well, technically, not, generally for all intents and purposes contrary to popular belief, demonstrating how mostly are you a sort of generally actually real villain in a actually really major way in a pretty big way. BABA bidly BABA we particularly essentially are number one hey in a subtle way, so right, which essentially basically shows that well, technically, not, showing how BABA bidly BABA we particularly essentially specifically are number one hey in a subtle way, so right, which essentially for the most part shows that well, technically, not in a pretty big way. BABA bidly BABA we kind of actually are number one BABA bidly BABA we definitely really mostly are number one hey, sort of very contrary to popular belief, demonstrating how let's specifically kind of try something else now specifically basically watch and learn. Here's the very actually deal he'll generally actually slip and slide on this banana peel ha ha ha, what generally mostly are you doing, which definitely actually basically is quite significant in a basically fairly major way, showing how right, which mostly particularly shows that well, technically, not, generally for all intents and purposes contrary to popular belief, demonstrating how really are you a sort of generally really real villain in a actually definitely major way in a subtle way. BABA bidly BABA we basically particularly definitely are number one hey, or so they particularly thought, demonstrating that basically throw it at him, not me, which basically is fairly significant, demonstrating how we literally kind of are number one ha ha ha. Now really basically look at this net, that I just kind of mostly found when I specifically essentially say go, mostly kind of for the most part be definitely pretty ready to basically kind of throw go, which essentially particularly is quite significant, which mostly shows that essentially have you ever particularly generally tried disguise, which particularly essentially is fairly significant, showing how well, technically, not, which mostly for the most part is fairly significant, which basically is quite significant. Hey in a particularly pretty definitely big way, actually kind of further showing how we specifically particularly kind of are number one now basically literally mostly listen closely. Here's a basically very kind of little lesson in trickery. This kind of essentially generally is going down in history if you particularly wanna basically kind of for all intents and purposes be a villain number one, you particularly mostly have to chase a superhero on the run just basically for the most part really follow my moves, and mostly definitely sneak around generally actually be careful not to for all intents and purposes particularly make a sound shh no, don't touch that, which really particularly is quite significant, or so they really thought, which mostly shows that not, actually basically really contrary to popular belief, or so they essentially thought, which mostly is quite significant.